Hey everyone, this time I had the honor to chat with Jason Greenwood. Jason is a well-seasoned e-commerce professional and a consultant. He's been using his 20 plus years of experience to help brands to level up their e-commerce game. He's also a passionate mentor, a commentator, he's a keynote speaker, and also a content producer. If you like, you can also check out his own podcast. The link is on the description below. As always, I hope you enjoyed this conversation, and if you like it, please consider subscribing to our podcast. My name is Rafael Berti, and this is the Intrepid Sellers. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And I'm very happy with our guest that we have, Jason Greenwood. Jason, thank you very much for joining us. Very happy that you're here. And for those that might not know you, I think it would be nice if you, Jason, could give us a short introduction about yourself.
Absolutely. No, it's great to be here. Really appreciate you having me on the show, Raphael. And I've been in e-commerce and digital for over 20 years now. I think it's coming up on 22 years now. And I started out actually working in agency land, and this was when e-commerce was really difficult. Pretty much there wasn't really any great platforms. It's not like today, where today there's Shopify, there's BigCommerce, there's 50 different platforms that you can get up and running pretty quickly and easily with e-commerce. It wasn't that way back in the early days of e-commerce. It just was not that way. Everything was pretty much bespoke. It was highly custom. There was OS Commerce and a couple of other platforms, and then there was the ultra high $1 million e-commerce platforms of the day, from IBM, etc. But there really wasn't, there wasn't any major SaaS platforms out there that made getting online and selling stuff online easy. And so everything was kind of bespoke. Everything was expensive. Everything was difficult. And what a lot of your listeners may not understand is that in the very early days of e-commerce, there was extreme distrust in e-commerce as well. So the end customers of these businesses. I mean, I remember because shortly after I started work very early in the piece working for agency land, but even before I left that agency, I started a side hustle e-commerce business with a very, very close friend of mine, where we started selling memory cards, digital memory cards online. And that was before I even quit my agency job. And, so we were seeing firsthand the hesitancy to buy online. And so we were receiving the emails, we were receiving the phone calls, people saying, where are you based? And of course our business was based in New Zealand, but I've got an American accent because I'm American. And so when they'd ring up and they'd hear my American accent, they'd say, where are you based? And I'd say, well, I'm based in New Zealand. They'd say, why do you have an American accent? And there was just extreme distrust. And when they would email us, they'd say, are you based in Nicaragua? I don't know what the deal was with Nicaragua, but it seemed to be like the name that they would always ask you. They would always ask you, are you based in Nicaragua? Or where are you based? And so there was just this extreme distrust in particularly putting your credit card in online and spending money online. And a lot of the banks, they didn't have easy to use direct credit payment systems at that point either. And so, making direct bank payments, you usually had to go into a bank branch. You had to, pay cash over the counter and say, hey, I want to put $50 into this account, and it was very expensive. It took a long time. So basically everything to do with commerce was just difficult in those early days. And the technology was expensive. It took a long time to deploy, and life was difficult. Life was hard. And many, many e-commerce websites at that stage were built bespoke in Flash. And as you well know, Flash is not indexable.
Days, yes.
Websites were built in Flash. They were built in frames, and those were not easily indexable by Google either. And you couldn't just send somebody a URL from a framed website, because of course you were getting the frame of the homepage, but you weren't getting the URL of the subpage frame. And so there was a lot of crappy technology, a lot of really crappy technology in the early days of e-commerce. So we didn't do ourselves any favors. In the industry, we did not do ourselves any favors in the early days, because we made it difficult to deploy, we made it expensive to deploy, and we made it, the technology was reasonably untrustworthy and difficult for Google to index. So we really made it we made a yoke for our own back, so to speak. And so I saw the industry, slowly take its first tentative steps out of that space. I started my own e-commerce business, pure play. Within about 6 months of myself and my business partner starting that business, we grew so fast that one of us needed to quit our job. I quit first because he was making more money than me at his day job. And then within another 6 months, we had grown so fast that my business partner needed to quit his day job, and we were both working from home offices at that stage, and the business needed both of us in the business. And then within another 6 months after that, we needed office and warehouse space. So within the span of 18 months, we basically went from zero to having our own office and warehouse space. And within another 12 months after that, we were doing nearly $1 million a year in revenue as a pure play online business. And we were importing all of our products directly from overseas. We were warehousing them locally and shipping them direct to consumer. So it was a really exciting time in the industry. It was difficult, it was hard, but it was also very exciting. And you learn a lot very, very quickly when you're talking to customers every single day. And if I think back across my career, I have never been as close to consumers since that time. I have never been as close to consumers as I was then, because I was literally responding to customer service emails. I was literally responding to the 0800 free phone number when they rang us, and my business partner and I would alternate. We'd alternate. We had a cell phone that redirected our free phone number to a cell phone that we would alternate. We would take the cell phone home on alternate days, and we basically had like a 24-hour customer service phone number, because unless it was like 3 a.m, we would answer the phone at pretty much all times of the day and night. And so, we had our finger on the pulse of the customer, just because we were, as owners and founders, we were directly servicing customers. And, I think that many businesses, they get ahead of themselves too early, and the founders of the business oftentimes, or the investors in the business, they're too far away from the customer. And as a result of that, they start to lose touch with what the market actually wants from them, and they start to lose touch with what starts to create an emotional bond with a customer in the first place. Because it's very rare when a brand is selling something that a customer can't get somewhere else, or at least an equivalent product somewhere else. And so in order to stand out with your customers, there's got to be something about what you do that really creates that emotional bond with the customer, that makes them feel special, that makes them feel important, that makes them feel, like you really appreciate, respect, and trust them. And we had this return policy that was basically a no questions asked return policy. And so if our customer rang up and either we sent the wrong thing or the product failed and it was within the warranty period, we would literally send them out a brand new product, for free. We would ship it for free via courier, and then we would include a return courier pouch in the courier pouch we sent them. So it was pre-addressed back to us. So all they had to do was to drop the faulty item back into a courier pouch, ring a free phone number, and the courier would come directly to their door to pick up the return item. So we were replacing something, completely trusting that our customers were not going to screw us, completely trusting that our customers were going to actually return the item that they said they were going to return to us. Now, we would track this in the e-commerce platform to make sure that we followed up if something didn't get returned, that we would follow up with them. But we just operated from a place of extreme trust with our customers, and we never, on the odd occasion, we had some fraud that occasionally happened on the website, but it was such a small percentage in the grand scheme of things of what we were doing, that when I think back of how we treated our customers, and I think back in comparison to that with some of the other businesses that I've worked with, and some of them have been amazing businesses, but basically the further you get from your customer as a founder, as a leader of a business, the worse off you are, is what I would say.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned all this story, because I was just remembering I actually have a very similar beginning as well, back in '99 when I was selling CDs online. And I'm talking, at that time when we had to make a transaction, someone, on our website, it was that Flash website that you mentioned, and we had our bank account there, and people had to make a deposit. You have to make a copy of the receipt, mail it to us with the name of the CD they wanted to buy, and then we get that. We check our bank account, we match with the transaction, and then we send the CD to the guy. The whole transaction would take 2 to 3 months for the person to receive the CD, right? But you're right about that. Even though it was so extremely hard and difficult, today we have so much more automation, and the operation is a lot more streamlined than it used to be. And we're talking about delivery as well. You have companies testing out same day delivery, which it's something it's in unimaginable back then, right? But at the same time, also coming from personal experience, I had back in the UK, in the beginning, we're talking more or less about 2008. We had customers, they would call us because they wanted to know there is someone actually running the website. It's not a scheme. It's not a scam. They're not, it's not just someone taking their credit cards and running away with it. So, so coming to my question, I wanted to ask you, I personally like automation. I believe you too, but I get the feeling that we somehow lost the contact with the customer. And I actually want to specifically ask you, what's your opinion on chatbots?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, and I have yet to meet a chatbot that I liked. And given the opportunity, I will immediately request to talk to a human, just because I just have not. And not to say that chatbots will not get to a point where they're really good, and they can effectively, we're going to cross the uncanny valley eventually. I think we will, where it'll be, a chatbot will be indistinguishable, or AI will be indistinguishable from a human. I think we'll eventually get there on a long enough time horizon. But as of right now, I haven't found a chatbot that I liked, or met a chatbot that I liked, and I will always opt out given the opportunity. But sometimes you just simply do not have the opportunity. They force you down a certain number of questions. Maybe it's 3 layers deep or something like that, where if in 3 answers they don't give you the answer that you're looking for, then they'll offer you the opportunity to talk to a human. And I think that, offering an opt out as early as possible for customers that will become rapidly frustrated. So some people will persevere because they actually don't want to interact with a human. Some people are just wired that way. They would far rather self-serve than they would speak to a human being. But I'm usually that way. I would generally rather self-serve. But when I get to a place where I've reached peak frustration and I can no longer self-serve because I've hit a blocker, I actually want to talk to a human, and I want to talk to them like yesterday. And I think businesses that don't have live chat outside of standard business hours, businesses that don't offer, human-driven live chat at all, businesses that don't offer a free phone number at all, or even a phone number at all on their website, and they don't even necessarily offer. This is probably my biggest pet peeve on e-commerce websites. Some e-commerce websites, in fact, probably more than 50%, they've got a contact form but no email address. So you can only send an email to them through a contact form. So I don't have any history of the email to where I can refer back to that. I will always choose, given the option, I will always choose to email an email address from my email client, so that I've got a history of the transcript, of the email transcript, so that I can go back and I can see the discussion we've had in the back and forth of an email transcript. And so that I've kind of got proof, if I need proof of what I've said or what they've said, or a commitment that we've made, then I want to be able to see that in a thread. I don't want to send that through a form. And so there's lots of really low-hanging fruit, I believe, of businesses today. And as we start to look like the world is going into recession, I think some of these old school customer service skills, which seem so rudimentary and so simple today, I think that technology, as I see it, should be about allowing you to scale the unscalable, right? So tech is an enabler from my perspective, not a replacement. It's not a replacement for humans. It augments the ability for humans to do something at scale that they would not otherwise be able to do at scale. So if you think of something even as simple as the help desk platform, Gorgeous, if you have an email address on your website, when an email is sent to that email address, it can automatically create a ticket in the help desk. So that allows anyone on the team that's free at that time to pick up that ticket and run with it instead of trying to grab it from an email inbox on an exchange server somewhere, which is kind of how things used to be done. And so I think that technology is a massive enabler. I'm a massive fan of automation. I'm a massive fan of, particularly for redundant, tasks that just get repeated over and over and over again 1,000 times a day. Those things can and should be automated. But where the rubber hits the road with direct customer interaction, you have to be seriously careful to not try to over automate that. And particularly when it comes to proactive customer outreach. And I'm not aware of any brand. And in fact, I've been buying online, and I buy probably about 90+% of my purchases are done online, and have been for the last 5 to 10 years, because I hate shopping. I literally cannot stand physical shopping. And so I try to do all my shopping online. And so I've seen a really good cross section of online customer experiences. And I cannot remember a single instance in the last decade where a brand that I've bought online with has just called me out of the blue and said, "Hey, you're a customer of ours. We really appreciate you, and we'd like to just have a chat with you about, what caused you to do business with us in the first place. What has your experience been like? How could we improve things? How could we do things better?" There's automated follow-up emails requesting product reviews. There's automated follow-up emails for NPS. There's automated follow-up emails for 100 different things. But that, to me, is not the level of personal touch that will dig deep enough with customers to get them to really tell you what they think about your brand. And that kind of can only happen when you create an environment where they feel safe to do so. And so if you create an environment by ringing them or emailing them and say, "Hey, I'm gonna ring you on this day and this time because I want to have a chat with you. You're really important to us, and we want to find out a little bit more about your overall shopping experience online, as well as your specific experiences with us as a brand. We want to just chat to you about that. I'll call you on this day. If that time doesn't suit, please propose a time that suits," or just ringing them out of the blue and giving it a try. Just going through, both, kind of the top spenders, maybe the top 10% and the bottom 10% of your customers, and just trying to figure out how can we improve the experience for both ends of the spectrum, right? And I think that brands have just completely, in the desire to automate and scale easily and efficiently and at low cost, they have completely forgot what it means to love the customer. So I hear brands say they're customer centric, but all that means in most instances from a practical perspective is I've implemented technology that allows me to automate 95% of the touch points with my customer. And I think that that's a missed opportunity for brands.
Yeah, I totally hear you, and I totally agree with you. I'm also thinking that actually leads to my next question: is there any technology in e-commerce that you're particularly excited about?
Look, I was really starting to get excited where some of the green shoots were coming from a Web3 perspective and bridging the physical and digital gap. And I still think that I still think on a long enough time horizon, we start spending more time in the metaverse than we do in the real world. I think that's inevitable. I think it's
Mhm.
absolutely inevitable. Maybe not, next year, maybe not even 5 years from now, maybe not even 10 years from now. But eventually we get to the matrix. That's eventually where we get as humanity. People say, no, that'll never happen. But then they also said that they would never buy a smartphone. Those same people said they'd never buy a smartphone. Those same people said they'd never use retinal scanning and they'd never use a thumbprint to open their phone. Those same people said, they'd never shop online and put their credit card in online. And yet now those same people do that. So I think that humans are really bad about predicting what they will do in a given scenario. And particularly as a new generation will eventually come along that will grow up spending most of their time in the metaverse from birth, from the time they're very young. Kids nowadays, parents use iPads and iPhones as a babysitter, right? From the time they're
Mhm.
2, 3 years old, They're giving them an iPad to keep them busy with these interactive games, right? Might be a spelling game, might be a color game, whatever it might be, right? And I don't think you could predict 10, 15 years ago that would be the case, that parents would be using iPads and iPhones as babysitters, but they do. And I see it every single day, every single time I go out in public. And so I think that humans are just really bad when they think about and say what they would never do. I just think that most of the time we turn around and do exactly what we said we would never do. And so, and it's the same with privacy. I think people say that they care about privacy, but their behavior to me says to me they don't give a fuck about privacy. They care about a fair exchange for privacy versus convenience. And if you give them enough convenience and you give them enough reason, they will give up every single piece of data that they ever had and willingly do so, which is what we see every single day with interaction with social media. So I just think we as humans have historically, and I've seen this pattern repeat 100 times in my career, where people say, I will never do that. And then 2 years later, they're doing it. So I just think that we can never fully predict where technology is going to go. So I think that Web3, has its dark sides and has its downsides. But I think we eventually get there. And I think we live in the metaverse. And I think we live a matrix life. But I think before we get there, I think there's some fundamental and foundational technologies that haven't even been adopted by the lion's share of omni-channel businesses. Things like CDPs, things like PIM technologies, things like SaaS technology across all of their technology stack. There's still many, many brands that are using legacy technology with a lot of technical debt. There's a lot of businesses that I talk to every day that are using a 20-year-old ERP that's on premise and is creaking at the seams. And so when I go in, and I'm oftentimes brought in to help brands with, what e-commerce platform should we have, or help us define our requirements so that we can find an agency development partner to help deliver this experience for us. But usually when I get in there, I'd say in excess of 90% of the time, once I start digging under the bonnet of the rest of their business, because I work across people, process, tech, and data. I don't just work on and I don't even just work on the e-com tech itself. I consult on ERP, CRM, WMS, OMS, PIM, CDP, POS, system integration. Basically, if it's part of the commerce stack, if it's part of the technology stack that ultimately eventually touches the customer, I work across that and I consult on that. And so usually when I go in and somebody thinks, hey, we've got, we're on the cusp of an e-commerce, let's say it's a replatform project, 9 times out of 10, they actually need to get the back of their house in order. They need to get their product data in order. They need to get their customer data in order. Need to get so many things in order before they're ready to actually implement a cutting edge e-commerce experience on the front end, because they just do not have the operational capability or the data capability or the people and human resource capability to deliver a first-class e-commerce experience or an omni-channel experience, because oftentimes their back office is a shambles. And so these are the types of experiences I oftentimes find myself in with clients.
Yeah, so I can hear many companies, they come to you seeking some kind of help with your consulting service. But then I would like to know what sort of challenges do you see the most? What are the most common difficulties they have that these companies are seeking help with?
Well, I work and focus on the most complex of commerce environments. So I don't typically work with clients that have really simple, I don't really work with too many vanilla B2C pure play e-commerce businesses, for example. Most of my clients are really complex B2B businesses, really complex D2C businesses, or a combination of the two. And so that means I'm primarily working with manufacturers, wholesalers, and distributors that are either selling to other businesses or want to create direct routes to market, digital and otherwise. And so what I'm seeing usually when I go in is that these businesses oftentimes, despite COVID, have not invested in e-commerce, have not invested in technology for sometimes over a decade. And so they're running really old systems, or you'd be surprised, in many cases with these B2B businesses, they've never done e-commerce. So they've literally never sold online. They've sold using field sales reps, physical stores, business development managers, BDRs, BDMs, they've got a whole phalanx basically of of sales teams that are effectively selling on their behalf via a one-to-one relationship with named accounts. And but what they're seeing and what exploded during COVID was a scenario where those same customers who during COVID, those field sales reps couldn't go and see customers. They couldn't go and see them. So they were trying to see customers via Zoom call. And all of a sudden the end customer, the B2B end customer is going, hang on a second. If I'm talking to my sales rep via Zoom call, why don't you just give me an e-commerce interface where I can place my order? Why can't I have an e-commerce interface where I get my right pricing tier as soon as I log in? Why can't I see my custom price list? Why can't I request a custom quote through your website? Why can't I get a response to the quote and get that approval online? Basically, why can't I have all of the services that you offer, but digital equivalents of those services? And these are the questions that B2B businesses are getting asked in increasing numbers every day. And this is where I go in and I help businesses to start translating those analog, very legacy experiences into digital equivalents. And the barriers that I see more often than not are the sense of being threatened. So sales teams feeling extremely threatened by digital technologies and saying, well, look, I'm going to resist that because maybe I'm going to miss out on a commission, or maybe I'm afraid of being replaced altogether and being fired, or we're now going to transition to a pure play e-commerce online business. What is going to happen to me as a sales rep or a BDR, a BDM, or an AM? What's going to happen to my job? But then one of the ways that I tackle this is to say, look, and I usually start off with a question, and I'll ask maybe the sales manager or whatever, whoever's kind of leading sales or leading revenue for the business. I'll say, what percentage of your day, roughly, is spent on admin tasks? So spent on entering customer orders directly in the ERP after you take them from them, or responding to them, or receiving faxes. You would be surprised how many businesses still receive faxed quote requests or email quote requests. How much time does it take you to respond to an emailed quote request? How much time does it take you to send them a sample? How much time does it take you to take all these phone calls? And obviously you can only take one phone call at a time. So while you're on one phone call, you'll get another phone call, and then your customer will leave a message. Then you have to ring them back. Then you have to schedule a Zoom call. Like, just the amount of admin effort required by most salespeople is extreme. Something like 50% of their time is spent on admin. And so, and once I get them to admit that, and I say, how much time, percentage wise, of your day is spent doing admin stuff, which I know salespeople absolutely hate anything admin related, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or how many administrators do you have assisting you doing those admin jobs, right? And once I get them to talk about that and open up about the stuff that they hate, and I kind of get on their side and I get on their team and I help them understand how we can automate those elements out of the business to where the admin stuff just kind of happens, so that they can actually focus on the relationship with the customer, which is the part that they actually love, so that we can get the right, revenue recognition and attribution to them. So that it remains a named account, whether they buy online or they buy over the phone. Doesn't matter. They get the right attribution. We're not trying to replace them. We're trying to help them do their job better. We're trying to help them enjoy their job more, get more fulfillment out of their job, and ultimately give the customer a much higher level of personalized service. That's what we're trying to do with whilst reducing errors. Because when you've got salespeople furiously typing orders into an ERP, there's a lot of errors, and this stuff happens all the time. And the effort required to unwind an error, particularly in international transactions, is extreme. And so, we're trying to reduce errors, we're trying to increase customer service, and we're trying to reduce their pain of administration. And so, I'm an ally. I'm an ally. I consider myself an ally of sales teams because I know how important they are to a business. And so, once they recognize that I'm more on their side, then I'm not an enemy, and they shouldn't feel threatened by me. But I am there as a consultant to tell them where their baby's ugly. That's what customers pay me for. They ultimately pay me to tell them when their baby's ugly, because nobody inside the business is going to say that. And so these are the types of conversations I'm having with businesses pretty much on a daily basis.
Right. Okay, it sounds very interesting. And then that, I was just thinking, why do you think B2B has been so slow to adopt e-commerce into their operations? Do you think this is a management problem, or is really the lack of technology there? How do you see this?
A lot of it has to do with the consumer expectations. The B2B consumer side never
Hmm.
had incredibly high e-commerce expectations, whereas the retail consumer has always had pretty high expectations. And of course, Amazon, who kind of cherry picked that B2C consumer side, they've raised expectations globally to where the last best retail experience becomes your new base expectation of all future experiences, right? And so what's happened is that B2B buyers have, and I hate to use this term, died off, and they've been replaced by a younger generation of B2B buyers that are
Hmm.
e-commerce consumers during their normal off time. So they do a lot of online buying, right, as a consumer, and they buy on Amazon and they buy through DDC websites, etc., for their personal life. And they've just naturally carried over those expectations into their B2B buying expectations. And so we've had a lot of
Hmm.
attrition in the B2B space over, say, the last 5 years, where really, really old school B2B buyers who didn't really care about, they actually liked the personal service and they didn't actually care about having anything automated. They didn't care about being able to see their price list online. They didn't care about being able to request a quote online. They didn't care about any of that stuff. But now we have a new generation of B2B buyers that have grown up buying online, and now their expectations are being translated to the B2B buying experience. And they want to, if I'm a, and I worked with a client who is one of the largest global B2B manufacturers and wholesale distributors of trailer and heavy truck parts. They do billions of dollars a year in business. They have never had an e-commerce side of their business. They do billions of dollars a year in revenue across any of the brands. They have never offered e-commerce across any of their brands. And but they service a lot of, for example, uh, mechanics. They service a lot of service shops for heavy trucking, machinery, etc. And these guys that are working in a pit all day long, they don't want to then have to ring up somebody during their busy day and order parts for the next day. They want to just go home while they're sitting on their couch sipping their beer. They want to be able to jump on their iPad and they want to be able to order all the parts for the stuff they're working on the next day, right? And so, just the consumer expectations have continued to evolve, and a lot of B2B businesses just have not kept up with that expectation. But COVID really accelerated that and forced them to rethink every aspect of how they do business. That make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I'm just thinking, we some time ago we actually interviewed someone from a logistical company that they serve a lot of customers and businesses importing from China to US, Europe, and so many other countries. And it's a very interesting thing that it seems that the B2B kind of sentiment of towards technology is similar what happens in logistics in freight forward with freight logistics. And then what he said is that you see nowadays, you see a lot of new startups, upcoming startups. They're taking over businesses that the big companies, they cannot do it simply because they're not fast enough to innovate. And we've seen this accelerated with during the pandemic with the COVID 19. And then that has we've seen a problem in the distribution of goods and the speedy delivery of goods worldwide because e-commerce accelerated the buying, the purchase of goods, and suddenly the all the logistics, the supply chain was not prepared for such a high demand. Um, and it's very interesting because he mentioned precisely what you said, that there's a younger generation coming now that they're bringing solutions, and they're doing things that the other companies, despite all the tradition and all the knowledge they have, they wouldn't dare to do so. And then the question I have for you is like, do you think these old legacy companies, I don't know if I can call them legacy companies, but the old ones, they would still like survive the newer generation? Will they be able to adapt to it? And I mean also the B2B companies. What are you seeing? Do you see B2B companies now moving on to technology as fast as possible? Or they are still like someone's try to accommodate technology but without leaving behind their old traditional way of calling people, emailing for quotes? How do you see this?
Look, I think there's quite a bit more attrition to go before we see the B2B space en masse move to digital ways of working. And I think there's a
Mm.
big reason for this. And this isn't just B2B, but it's particularly endemic in B2B. And this is something that I can say because I resemble what I'm about to say, so I can get away with it. But we see male, pale, and stale, right? On boards, we see predominantly old white dudes. On the biggest companies in the world are still run mostly on boards of directors by old white dudes. And so until a lot of these old white dudes either die or retire, these businesses will have 1 foot in the past or 1.5 feet in the past and maybe half a foot in the present versus these newer companies that you're talking about, which have 1 foot in the present and 1 foot in the future. And I think that's what the difference is, right? We've got these younger, more aggressive. I just had Flavor Cloud, the founder, Ratna Sharad. She's a young Indian lady. Not that young, but she's young enough. And she started up a company, a logistics software company, specifically because she saw a gap in the market. I don't want to say specifically because it's ruled by old white dudes, but it oftentimes is. She saw a gap in the market. She comes from a developer background. She comes from a tech background. And she said, why can I not solve my problems with software? Well, actually, I can, and I'm going to go and write it myself. And so she actually wrote the first kind of generation of her platform. Now she has a huge development team behind her as well. But she was able to write kind of that first generation, that MVP of her platform herself because she's a coder. And she's a business person, she's an entrepreneur, and she's a coder. And I think that we're seeing younger and younger founders doing exactly what she has done and do it very successfully. And the legacy companies that she's just writing or creating a completely parallel. She's not competing with anybody. She's
Mhm.
writing a completely parallel path. She's creating a completely parallel journey to where, hey, if you're a business and if you want to have this level of automation and you want to have this level of functionality, you want to have this level of visibility into your logistics, and you want to have plug and play functionality to do what she's building, then there is literally no one else you can go with. There's no one else in the world that is building technology exactly like hers. And so she's taking very much a blue ocean strategy to what she's doing. And I see a lot of very smart, young, capable entrepreneurs that are doing exactly this. They're not going into legacy industries and trying to compete head on in a red ocean way where they're trying to build a slightly better version of what's out there. They're creating something that is radically different to what's out there and completely replacing it wholesale. And so I think a lot of these legacy businesses, they should be very afraid because they're able to build software solutions on the smell of an oily rag. And these companies, they can throw billions of dollars at it, but it's still like trying to turn the Titanic. Very difficult to do.
Mhm. Still talking about the B2B side of the business, but focusing more specifically about the brands and manufacturers. Do you see, we have seen a bit of a trend on D2C or brands selling directly to consumers. Is this something that, you have also, you think that brands need to catch up? I mean, because that has been the transformation as well. Like, in the past, the brands would usually just focusing on creating a product or a few products, and then they would just, do the most wholesale they could. So they would find distributors and retailers and, sign some agreements and just get rid of the stock. But now you have marketplaces like Amazon, where you have a bunch of people coming and representing your brand as well, selling your products. So your products are no longer relegated only for the authorized resellers, but now you have pretty much anyone, a John Doe, just buying your product and selling online. And do you feel like brands should also come up? I mean, we have seen some brands moving towards the e-commerce, but do you see this as like more brands are coming up with this, or they still like relegated to just continue on the old fashioned way of simply just manufacturing and leave e-commerce for someone who understands it? This is not our game. Is it? Do you see this as well?
Yeah, it's definitely accelerating. And I think there's two primary reasons why that's the case. So, first of all, it's a margin thing, right? So the market just will not tolerate, massive wholesale margins, massive importer margins, massive distributor margins, and massive retailer margins. And the reality is, even as recently as 20 years ago, there would be 4 or 5 sets of hands that a product would often transition through on the way to the end consumer. So there would literally be the manufacturer, the importer, the distributor, the wholesaler, the retailer. There'd be 4 or 5 sets of hands, and everybody'd be making their 5 or 10 or 15%. And by the time it made it to market, a product would be marked up hundreds of percent versus its manufactured price, right? And so we are seeing much more aggression by manufacturers to establish DDC routes to market. So, and it's not just margin, it's also range representation. And so what we're seeing is that a lot of manufacturers have realized, hey, we might have distributors in a region, or we might have resellers in a region, or retailers in a region that work with us, but they're going to cherry pick our range. They're going to cherry pick the products that they think they're going to be able to sell the most of. Let's say you're a watch manufacturer, right? And you manufacture 50 different models per year, right? And maybe 25 of those are for females and 25 of those for males. Well, they're gonna pick the top, say, 5 female watches and the top 5 male watches that they think they're going to be able to move massive volumes of, and they're going to, instead of going wide, they're going to go deep because it limits their exposure in the market. Now, the problem for the brand is that you don't get the full range representation in market, and so you might have created this full range, worked very hard to try to create a range that caters to several different segments in the market. But if no one in market is prepared to carry your full range, then what do? You end up having to liquidate massive amounts of stock at virtually zero margin through something like an Amazon, through a wholesale liquidation store, a branded liquidation store, or through one of the wholesale outlets that exist all around the world, the cut price wholesale outlets around the world that have physical retail stores, and manufacturing brands are just realizing, hey, not only are we giving up a tremendous amount of margin by not going direct to consumer, but we're also not selling everything that we're designing and making because resellers and wholesalers cherry pick. And so that's a big, big issue. And the flip side of that is that a lot of these B2B businesses, they are still reliant, say, 70 to not, even after they establish a direct to consumer channel, they're still reliant on wholesale accounts for, say, maybe 70 to 80% of their revenues. And so it's a really difficult thing for them, because if they go direct to consumer and the market knows about that, their wholesalers will just say, well, look, we're not going to carry your products anymore because you're competing directly against us in the market. Or the end retailers will say, we're not going to carry your products anymore because you're competing directly against us, and we'll never be able to match you on price. So why should we do business with you? Why should we help you stick a knife in us, basically? And so I do see that as being a very hard discussion between manufacturers and wholesalers and retailers. Very hard discussion. So what a lot of B2B brands are doing is they're establishing their own retail brand, right, that isn't directly linked to their manufacturing brand, and they're establishing that as an online channel for their products, and they're effectively buying the products at cost from the manufacturer, which is them, and then they're selling it full retail online. So there's lots of complexity in these businesses that try to establish direct to consumer channels, but it's definitely accelerating. But the biggest challenge I see beyond the channel conflict, because there is channel conflict, as I've said, but the biggest challenge beyond channel conflict and how to resolve that is most B2B businesses are used to shipping cartons, pallets, and containers, not individual items. And so everything about their business is designed on a mass scale. And so they don't know how to, literally don't understand how to individually pack an item. They don't have contracts with couriers that will deliver individual items. They don't have reverse logistics for individual items. They just don't have the scale to be able to make those individual shipments to consumers efficient enough to retain as much margin as they think they're going to retain by selling retail. And so they see it as a silver bullet, but when they actually start doing it, and then they've actually got to have customer service, they got to have live chat, they got to have help desk, they got to have phone, they got to have all these things that retailers just do by definition of being a retailer. They have no idea what's involved in that, how expensive it is, how hard it is, how complex it is. They have no idea. And so when they start doing it for the first time, they think it's going to be just an expansion of their B2B business, and it's just an easy bolt on. But it's so much more than that. It is so much more than that. And so these are the types of conversations I have to have with them, so that I help them set very realistic expectations of the ROI of a DDC channel, because it is not always the silver bullet that they think it's going to be. And unit economics oftentimes don't work in a D2C environment the way that they do in a wholesale environment. And so, we see lots of D2C brands now that have never made a profit. They've taken in huge amounts of investor funding, hundreds of millions of dollars, and they've never made money. We look at Allbirds, we look at Casper, we look at pretty much every single famous direct-to-consumer brand you can think of has never been profitable. And so direct-to-consumer is not always a silver bullet unless they can find that right channel mix between wholesale, online retail, physical retail, and leverage a store estate for click and collect, etc. It's much, much harder to make money online than most manufacturers think.
Yeah, after everything you said, actually made me wonder, what's your opinion about the brand aggregators?
Well, we're seeing the likes of Thrasio. We're seeing all the major brand aggregators retrenching. And we're seeing that in theory, economies of scale by centralizing back office operations, customer service operations, even e-commerce platforms, we're not seeing the level of efficiency that a lot of these aggregator brands thought they would be able to bring to the table, because each of these brands has their own culture. They've got their own customer experience expectations. And many of these brands, they grew up as Amazon native brands. So they literally don't have any other channel other than Amazon. They started, they grew, and they became basically FBA Amazon brands. And so they have no brand representation outside of the Amazon channel. And so if Amazon sales start to falter, or if Amazon costs grow too high versus the margin that they can make on their products, they've got no fallback. They've got no alternative channel that they can rely on, or at least no alternative channel with a low CAC. That's the problem, because if they establish a DDC channel, then they've just got to throw millions of dollars at Facebook and Google for customer acquisition. And so most of these direct to consumer brands, they will, in this escalating CAC environment, where even Facebook themselves has admitted that over the last 12 months, ad inflation has been on average 30%. And Google is saying that ad inflation through Google is running at about 15% per annum. Amazon, as far as I'm aware, doesn't publish their ad inflation, because they're the third largest ad network now in the United States after Facebook and Google. They don't publish, as far as I'm aware, their ad inflation rates, but I'm sure it's similar. It'd be similar to Google or Facebook. And so the rising CAC costs are totally unsustainable for most businesses. And so, Thrasio and even the individual D2C brands, their whole business model was, let's go out and pour hundreds of millions of dollars into customer acquisition. So we're going to lose money for the first 5-10 years, whatever it is. Then we're going to turn those customers into loyal customers that we never have to acquire again, and let's just remarket to them, and then our CAC costs will come down and we'll be profitable. The problem is that there's no brand loyalty. There's zero brand loyalty. There's none. And so the statistic, even in the United States, is something like 90% of consumers that buy through a D2C brand only ever buy through that brand once. So even getting even a second purchase, never mind 3, 4, 5, 10 purchases, just even getting a second purchase by your customers online is damn near impossible. So these DDC brands are really struggling with the unit economics of their business.
Hmm. How do you think they could increase their repurchase rate? Any kind of
It's
incentive that
difficult,
you could give?
Look, I think it's difficult. It is really, really difficult. I think that many of these brands, particularly like a Casper, for example, they're not selling a consumable good. And so, their natural purchase life cycle is probably something like 8 to 10 years. And so, even if they could get customers to repurchase through them, it's not going to happen every month. It's not going to even happen every year. It's probably going to happen every 5 to 10 years. And so, I just think those businesses are, unless they can increase their range into something that is a little bit more consumable, whether that be, in the case of Casper, whether that be into pillows and bed linen and other things that they can effectively cross sell and upsell in between the times that they're selling mattresses. They really are going to have a point of differentiation in the market, and all of these DDC brands, they're going to have to improve their curation of the products that they sell to make sure that they are truly unique, that they are truly that basically if a customer wants to buy from them, they have to buy from them. They cannot get that same thing or even a close equivalent anywhere else. And so I think we're going to just see some incredible consolidation, because it's really difficult to create a brand new product that is actually genuinely that unique. You know, I wear Allbirds and I absolutely love Allbirds, but you know, and I think they're probably the most comfortable tennis shoe that I've ever worn, but they don't work in every environment. And I still also have a pair of Nikes and a pair of cross trainers sitting next to my Allbirds on my shoe rack. And so I would never be just an Allbirds buyer, for example. And so I think that these brands that think they have something so unique that customers will just come back and buy from them forever, I just don't think brand loyalty exists anymore. And I think that customers are smart enough to know that every time they go to repurchase, say, for example, even Nike shoes, for example, who Nike is one of the strongest D2C brands in the world, and actually one of the most profitable D2C brands in the world. The last 3 pairs of Nike shoes I bought, I didn't buy through Nike because I couldn't get the model of shoe that I wanted at the cheapest price through Nike online. I could get models that I couldn't get through them. I could get models through retailers, and that's why the retailers can still win, because they will do a deal, for example, with a wholesaler like Nike that says, "Hey, I want to carry these 5 shoes, and these 5 models, and I don't want you to sell them to any other retailers. I want to have exclusivity." And so this is the deals that are being done, the backroom deals that are being done between manufacturers and retailers, is exclusive ranges, exclusive models, and everybody makes money, right?
Mhm.
So look, there's some really interesting stuff happening in the D2C space.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we mentioned a couple of times about the COVID. We also mentioned about, we've seen a boom in e-commerce during the COVID times. But we now seem to be going in a downturn, and, the economies seem to be going to a recession. We have a war going on. We also mentioned the increase in costs for sellers as well. Is there any sort of advice that you would give to sellers to prepare for now and the years to come? What should they be doing now in order to prepare for the bounty years that are to come, and at least so they can survive these recession years or periods? We don't know how long this is going to last, but how can they go through this downturn in the economy and still be profitable and then come out on top in the end?
Yeah, very good question. I think it does matter a little bit on the business. This is reasonably generic advice, but it's been advice I've been giving on LinkedIn over the last couple of months, because I've been talking more and more. I've been pivoting my content because I went through the .com boom and bust. I went through the GFC, and I went through the beginning of COVID. I went through all of COVID, and so the downturn at the beginning of COVID, I went through that as well, and I went through numerous smaller recessions in the meantime, both in the United States and in New Zealand and Australia. So I guess I have a little bit of experience on this, that you start to see patterns emerge. It will never be exactly the same, but definitely you see patterns kind of repeating over and over again when cheap capital distorts markets massively and it gets misallocated massively, like it did during COVID. It was exactly the same thing during the GFC. It was exactly the same thing during .com. Capital was massively misallocated. It was too cheap for too long. Central banks kept interest rates too low for too long, and we had massive debt spending by governments. And we had the exact same thing happen during COVID. And now they're trying to blame, high inflation on COVID spending combined with the war in Ukraine, when in actuality, it's pretty simple. The central banks kept interest rates too low for too long. They used all the monetary ammunition they had at their disposal. And now we've got literally trillions of dollars worth of government debt that's going to have to unwind over the next 18 to 24 months. And so we are set for some of the roughest probably financial times since the GFC and since .com. And, that's likely to last anywhere from 12 to 36 months, judging by previous recessions and how long the overhang from that happens. And so you're right, businesses need to be smart about where they're allocating money, but I would encourage them not to completely stop innovation in the business, because what we saw at the beginning of COVID, and I experienced this, is that every single client I had put virtually every single project, every major project, digital project, on hold at the beginning of COVID. They didn't know whether they were going to be out of business tomorrow. There was so much uncertainty at the beginning of COVID. Even online businesses, even pure plays, were thinking, we're dead. These lockdowns are going to kill our business. And so they stopped spending. Literally I took like 10 phone calls in the span of a week of people saying, we're putting these massive projects on hold indefinitely. But then within 2 months, every single one of those projects and some were back on the boil, right? And then those businesses really struggled to get resource over the following 2 years. They really struggled to get enough digital capability into their business, because their businesses were growing at a great rate of knots. And so I think I would caution against completely closing the purse. I think you need to be prudent. I think you need to give your business as much runway as possible. Absolutely. But the businesses that spent the most on tech, and e-commerce tech in particular, pre-COVID and in the first 6 months of COVID, were the ones that killed it during the peak of COVID, right? And so any business today, I think, that makes really smart, really rational investments in technology today, that's going to make them more efficient, is going to create better customer experiences, is going to allow them to scale in an unlimited way. I think any smart investment like that has, is going to allow you to do things that have the highest level of promise over the next 12, 18, 24 months. If you can do that, and you can give yourself enough financial runway to get there through the next 18 to 24 months, you will come out the other side in a much stronger position, where you can capitalize and consolidate and take market share from everybody who didn't do that.
Mm-hmm. Jason, this was a great conversation. Thank you very much for your answers and your insights. I definitely feel a lot more knowledgeable than I was before we started this conversation. I hope the audience does too. And I really appreciate your time. If people would like to get in touch with you, how should they do about that?
Look, I'm everywhere, but the best is probably LinkedIn. Search Jason Greenwood on LinkedIn. I post there almost every single day. Even when I put out new podcast episodes and other content, I tend to always post to LinkedIn as well. So, connect with me on LinkedIn, DM me on LinkedIn, follow my content on LinkedIn, and you'll pretty much see everything I put out.
Fantastic. Jason, thank you very much. Have a good one.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to doing it again soon.
Thank you.